All right. Welcome everyone. This is another game slash VSGI speaker series, and I am very excited to host our very own Alejandro Williams. He graduated from our program back in 2013. So he is actually one of the first cohort who graduated with a BFA in computer game design program. And Alejandro has 7+ years of experience in working in the video game industry from 2017 to now. And he has a 5 years experience in AAA game development and 2 years in mobile game development. And he have worked at Bethesda Softworks and Microsoft and also Meta and Facebook. And along with Alejandro, we welcome Chrissy, who is representative from IATSE, which stands for International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. So they will share their insight about the industry. And without further ado, Alejandro.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start off by asking you to ask yourselves what inspired you to work in video games. Whether it's games that you played, movies that you saw, books that you read, I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. So first, we're going to talk about how the industry is changing. And what we're going to start off with is some fun data. It's important to know that about 1 in 10, or 11% of game developers globally, were laid off in 2024. Approximately 41% of all game developers in the world have been affected by these layoffs. In the past 2.5 years, between 2023 to 2025, about 35,000 game industry jobs have disappeared. Of all the open positions that are currently being offered within the game industry, about 86% of them do not offer remote work options at all, and only about 14% of those positions offer remote work options. This is data that has been sourced from Amir Satvat, who is a game industry leading voice and an active game industry leader. The average career length for workers in the industry is around 5 to 7 years. And what this means is that in addition to entry-level roles becoming less and less available as the industry shifts, veteran and senior level talent is often leaving the industry faster than it can be replaced. The projected layoffs for 2025 were around 9,700 jobs lost, and that number ended up being a little over 10,000, I believe. Just between 2022 and 2025, the actuals versus projected were around 45,000. If you were someone who had lost your jobs in games, your chances of getting reabsorbed into the game sector within the next 12 months was around 20 to 25%. And the odds of finding game industry jobs for those looking for work fresh out of school is around 1% versus the odds of game industry veterans, which is around 12%, 27% within the year that they are looking for jobs. Civilian unemployment rate across the board outside of games industry is on the rise. And keep in mind that these stats do not account for those who were reportedly game industry workers who had to resort to applying for low minimum wage jobs outside of games and tech just so they could get their living expenses taken care of. Given the fact that the projected layoffs for 2026 appear to follow the same trend, This trend of civilian unemployment will probably continue to rise over the next 3 to 4 years unless there is a drastic shift in the economy or the job market. So, with all of that in mind, many of you might be asking yourselves, hasn't this all happened before? Thinking back to the game industry crash that took place in the mid to late 80s, um, perhaps that's what you're thinking. Well, let's go into that. It's important to understand that the previous video game market crash in the United States game industry was a result of the revenue dipping from around 3.2 billion in 1983 to around 100 million in 1985. In addition to that, there was a multitude of poor quality home consoles and bad games that had saturated the market, which resulted in consumer distrust and loss of investor confidence. And the rise of PCs was also taking place around this same time, which contributed to waned interest within the console market. Some of this might have been covered in the history classes that you took at the game design program. However, today, circumstances are significantly different. The global gaming market size is anticipated to grow from a worth of about 281 billion, which was tracked in 2023, to around 665 billion by 2030. Also, the Asian Pacific market is growing rapidly. It was valued at around 115 billion in 2022. And the mobile gaming market is also accelerating. And this is in large part due to smart devices seeing increased use across the socioeconomic spectrum. Hardware power is growing stronger. Accessibility is more widespread than it ever has been, as well as affordability worldwide. So the game industry is still very profitable. It's still growing, and it's projected to continue to grow. So no, this has not happened before. The current state of the game industry is unprecedented. So with that in mind, I'd like to shift the topic of discussion a little bit to go into talking about working conditions. I'm sure some of you all have heard stories, whether it's from friends or from commentators or stuff that you've read in media coverage. And I'm just going to play a couple of clips here just to flush that out a little bit. If you have not seen the dark side of the video game industry covered in the Patriot Act, this was based on coverage from 2017, so it's a little old at this point, but it still gives a pretty accurate window into some of the things that are being discussed when it comes to working conditions and workplace culture.
I think. I mean, does anyone hear the sound?
No.
No.
So you can the unshare your screen, and then when you share it, make
Mhm.
sure you select the audio setting. Yeah.
Okay, let me see what I can do here. There it is.
Riot for gender discrimination. So I sat
Yeah, it
down
works.
with a
Thank
woman
you. Yeah,
who
it
brought
works.
the riot story. She's an investigative reporter named Cecilia D'Anastasio.
So how did you hear about what was going on at Riot? Did you just drive by the offices and hear a bunch of mouth breathing and you were like, something is wrong?
I first heard what was happening at Riot when I was investigating another gaming company for alleged endemic sexism, actually.
That's really, really dark.
Yeah, I heard stories ranging from women not being able to hire other women into positions of leadership. I was also hearing stories about other women being on a list of like sexy employees that higher ups at the company wanted to sleep with. A lot of men told me about this COO like going behind them and humping them at meetings where women weren't present.
You know, I've always wondered what a COO does. Now I know.
You can watch more about that on your own time. It's definitely worth a watch, in my opinion. This next video is a direct anecdote from an industry professional at Blizzard, also sourced from around 2021.
I heard a lot of nightmarish stories, and these were stories that went through the whole. This was like common knowledge that one of the directors, and I think I might have even spoken about this in the past. One of the directors had was verbally abusive to this one particular artist who worked face to face with me, and he was verbally abusive to him all the time. And one day he had decided to stand up for himself and say, "Hey, knock it off," because he would do it right in front of everybody. There was no candor to it. It was just right out there and start insulting him and making fun of him and humiliating him and all kinds of shit. Just basically using him as a verbal punching bag. And he stood up for himself. And the other guy walked right up to his nose, shoved him on the floor, right there on his ass, and looked at him with the calmest look on his face and said, "Do something about it." Right.
So these stories are pretty common. They are especially common at the AAA level in large corporate companies. It's a big reason why HR is so heavily invested in by these companies. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more down the line. So next slide. You all have probably heard about problematic game industry leaders. This is a sourced piece of social media around the time of Borderlands 4's release. This is from Randy Pitchford in response to consumer criticism in regards to Borderlands performance and other related issues. As you can see, the tone is very professional. And this is unfortunately indicative of a trend in some game industry leaders. So, in review, the game industry is not predicted to crash, at least not in at all the way that it had back during the mid to late 80s. Again, the game industry has never been worth more globally. It has never been more popular across a wide variety of demographics. Just the term gamer has been accepted into the wider lexicon. People from all sorts of walks of life are either at least some degree familiar with games, if not active gamers themselves. And there have never been more layoffs within the game industry than between 2022 to 2025. And again, that trend is projected to continue into 2026. So why are all these layoffs happening? Well, there are some popular theories. There's global economic uncertainty, which has been affected by a variety of factors, such as what's going on in the federal government, as well as around the world. There have been emphases that have been placed on shareholder value that have only had more of an influence on the market, particularly as a result of consolidation and mergers. And then there is also the correction in hiring that is as a result of adjusting due to the rapid hiring that took place during the quarantine portion of the pandemic when everyone was working from home, which is when game and related sales and saw a massive increase, as well as uptime and active users across popular games at the time. And lastly, there's the rise of AI in tech and games that is changing the standards for how game development is done as we know it. So how is the industry probably going to change? Well, if you haven't noticed it already, the rise of indies is very much a thing. We've seen amazing examples of indie releases that not only rival AAA titles, but surpass them. And these are just a couple of examples. I'm sure you can think of others. And indies are expected to continue to rise in popularity and continue to be profitable. And this includes single player experiences, multiplayer experiences, not the live service cash cows that you've probably heard about that the AAA industry is pushing very hard. To give an example, of what consolidation looks like, Microsoft Gaming is one of the biggest umbrella companies within the States, and you see some pretty big names here. I could not fit every single game company that is under the Microsoft umbrella. But there's some major players here. We got Blizzard, Bethesda Game Studios, Double Fine, Mojang, Rare, Activision id. You get the idea. And again, what is unprecedented is this rise of AI. The AI boom is single-handedly responsible for making companies like NVIDIA some of the most valuable companies in the world. And an example of how this has worked in practice due to this shift in the industry as a result of incorporating AI is what took place over at King, where developers were training AI, and that AI ended up replacing them for the exact same tasks that they had been filling up to that point. That was around 200 developers that were laid off as a result. And this is the statement that was posted on social media to answer that question of why this was happening by the company themselves. However, despite this concerning trend in how AI is being used within the industry, it is important to note that AI adoption rates are starting to decline, and many are predicting that the AI bubble is expected to burst or at least shrink, and it's likely that the industry will balance itself out in some way. It's also important to understand that the AI trend and the AI market in general is extremely volatile. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in market value shifting over a short space of time. Just looking at the market in 2024, we saw massive dips in value. So with all that in mind, y'all still want to work in the game industry, I would hope. Well, let's talk about what you can do. If you're not doing this already, it's important to seek out employment support resources, network as often as you can, particularly with those that are active in the industry that are able to provide internal referrals. An internal referral is still one of the most reliable ways to get access to an industry position, whether it's entry level or senior level. It's also important to stay informed about the companies that you want to work for. That means more than just reading up on news coverage. It means researching these companies, again, networking with active employees within these companies, and be prepared to relocate to industry hubs because, again, remote roles are not particularly common, and these industry hubs are where the majority of these jobs are concentrated. Examples are like Austin, Texas, of course, the West Coast. And if you can't find work, it's important to be prepared to search for roles outside of the game industry that are adjacent to the skill sets that you're trying to build. And lastly, assuming you do get a role in the game industry, be prepared to handle a lot of workplace adversity, if not outright toxicity. These can be things like being expected to clock in for 8 hours, but really work 10 hours, in addition to whatever you're doing on your own time. And this is just so that you can stay competitive. It's important to remember also that the game industry is still very young. It's still growing. It's not all very well regulated yet. A lot is going to change within the next 5 years. And it's hard to predict how this will all shift, which is why it's so important to stay informed. And with that in mind, I'd like to talk about a trend that is on the rise, which is the rise of game industry unions. Based on data from GDC, around 53% of developers across all positions are in favor of unionization. And I'm going to give some examples of what that looks like in practice. Chrissy, feel free to jump in here. In 2023, Workers at Working Man Interactive unanimously unionized with the support from AOTC. There was another example in 2024 where workers at the motion capture studio for 2K also unionized with support from AOTC. And if you are willing to look into this, you can find a lot of examples of how unions are rising across the industry within the states.
If I can,
Yeah.
Alejandro. So when we're talking about unions for game workers, ultimately what we're saying is folks who work in games having the ability to have consent around the things that matter the most to them at work, which is your wages, your working conditions, and your benefits, right? So, um, Alejandro was also just talking about AI, and AI is what's called a mandatory subject of bargaining, meaning it's considered basically to be a part of your working conditions. Therefore, if AI is of huge concern to you as a worker, you should want to have a say over how it gets used. And the easiest way, well, not easiest, I'd say, the best way to make sure that you have a say in the things that matter the most to you is to come together with your coworkers, and make a demand for a union. And a union is really you and your coworkers. It's not like I'm a rep for the IATSE. Like it's not me coming in and planting a flag and saying this is a union studio. It's you all saying we deserve to have a say in the things that matter the most to us. And when we're talking about layoffs in general for games industry folks, I know you've seen it across the board that some workers get laid off and have nothing, and others get laid off and they get like a decent severance package that gets them through to the next thing, and they get to keep their health insurance for a period of time, etc. And the reason that that's not really standardized, or a given is that, your employers ultimately have ultimate discretion as to whether or not you get anything at work, whether you get that health insurance plan, whether you get a retirement plan, whether you get any of the major benefits that you get at work. Therefore, again, like when we're talking about creating a future for game workers that is sustainable and meaningful and leads to people working longer than 7 years, we're talking about creating an industry where game workers have consent over the things that matter to them. As Alejandro also said, we organized at 2K in Petaluma in California. They're motion capture workers. They were able to negotiate language around their severance pay. They locked in their health insurance plan in a way that their employer can't increase their contributions, like the employees' contributions to the insurance plan over the next 3 years, because that's how long the bargaining agreement is for. These contracts aren't indefinite simply because the industry changes and the work changes, and we need to resume negotiating over all sorts of things that come up. As for a little bit about me, before I pass it back to Alejandro, I used to work in animation as a 2D animator. I don't know if there's any creatives in the room that are hoping to go into animation or writing or any sort of like the more specifically art-driven roles in games, but I worked at a place in New York called Titmouse, and we formed our union there in 2022. And that was right when AI was kind of burgeoning, right? So when we negotiated our first contract, we didn't include explicit AI language. However, we did include language around technological change, meaning if the technology in the workplace is changing, our employer has to retrain us on that new technology so that we can keep our jobs, as opposed to just replacing us with someone else who knows how to use that new tech. And if we ultimately like can't learn, like it's an old dog learning new tricks, like we can't learn that new tech, then we get additional severance pay on top of it. But all that is to say, again, this is all about having consent over the things that matter the most to you. And we were able to achieve it for many workers. And especially now the 2K folks in Petaluma, they've got a really great contract. If you're interested in checking that contract out, I'll give you all my email address at the end of this. You can contact me. I'll give you a copy. It's a bunch of legalese, so it's not an easy read, but they got a lot of really great stuff in there. So I'll pass it back to you, Alejandro.
Thank you. Also, just to piggyback a little bit on that, on the job training in the industry, whether you're in art, programming, QA, other forms of production, like it's not common. Industry workers are typically expected to learn on their own time. And so for many new industry workers, it can often be a trial by fire. Additionally, a lot of employers are shifting over from full-time roles to contractual roles, in large part to have more control over how long they keep their employees and to incentivize employees to prove themselves from their competition, because we're talking about tens of thousands of people competing for some of these roles sometimes. If you've attempted to, for example, apply on LinkedIn for entry roles when they come up, you'll often see that over 100 people applied for the role that you're looking for. It's just the landscape right now. Going back to IATSE, IATSE has a division specifically focused on supporting video game industry laborers. If you're interested in learning more, I strongly encourage you to check out their zine and go to their website. Chrissy, if you have more to add, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great resources available on our website. If you go to gameworkers.org.links, a bunch of them are just easy peasy access there. We've got a bunch of game worker surveys available as well. So if you know folks who work currently in games or are working in motion capture as well, send them over to our website, because the more information we get, the better off we'll be in organizing. So our zine from 2025 and our zine from 2024 are available there. You can check those out. They're great resources for learning what a union is and how to organize.
Thank you. Continuing to talk about unions, it's important to understand that while unions are definitely something to consider, they're by no means a cure-all, and they may not be right for what you're looking for, depending on the situation that you're in, whether you're with a smaller company or a larger one. Changes in industry practices overall and legislation are what's going to make the bigger impact, which again is what unions are ultimately fighting for. It is the goal of labor organizing in games to improve conditions for all workers across the board, regardless of your demographic, regardless of your industry focus. And the hope is that this will affect adjacent industries as well. And when you're looking for a job, finding the right workplace is really what matters the most. There are examples of horror stories in large AAA studios that are rough, but there's also really positive examples depending on what department you're working in. And there's great examples of smaller, tight-knit studios like indie studios, such as like Supergiant Games or Team Cherry, that are less likely to have a lot of the cultural problems that were covered in these earlier slides that we talked about. And that's in large part due to these teams are a lot more tight-knit. There's a lot more open communication between those teams, which are a lot of the same values that labor organizing is trying to promote. Not only is it important to have agency as an employee, it's important to actually have like real ties with your coworkers. And I know that some of what we've covered here has been pretty dire, so I'd like to go back to that first slide where I asked you to consider what inspired you to want to work in games. Consider IPs and franchises. These are just some examples of ones that are inspired me. Recall other media that inspired you to be creative, because ultimately this is all about creative expression and innovation. It's important to remember why you wanted to do this and to understand that regardless of the current trends the industry is taking, regardless of how it's predicted to shift, there are still people out there doing good work. There is still talent that is rising, and it's really important to not give up, and don't surrender. We don't know exactly how things are going to change. We do know that the game industry is very unlikely to crash. We do know, again, that the game industry has never been more profitable. It is expected to continue to grow, which means that more roles are going to become available. Hiring is still going to continue. And that's my spiel. Here are just some more sources. I will include a link to the deck for you all to go through on your own time. And at this point, I think we are done with the presentation portion, and I think we are happy to do some Q&A if we have time.
Oh yes, we have like time, and then definitely we can have like Q&A now. And Actually, I'll start with one. If you think about this creative content industry, there are many like part-time people or like who works in like indie without having like full-time gig. So what would it be your recommendation for those people eventually to step up and then try to get employment at the bigger studio? And also uh, like unions actually, is there any like a collective effort to look over those part-timers or indie developers?
Sure. I think Chrissy and I can both jump in on this. So for my part, I do think that it has never been easier to get into the indie space than it is now, and that's for a variety of reasons. One, tools are more easily accessible than they ever were, and that includes like really powerful tools like the Unreal Engine, for example, tools like Godot, while Unity is seen like some like rocky shifts in its popularity, that's still a powerful tool. And local game jams are seeing increased participation. It's a lot easier to network in general. And I recommend working with your alumni, both people that are getting ready to graduate, those that have already graduated. Many of these people are still looking to build up their portfolios. There's a lot of room to grow there, whether you're trying to work as a programmer or an artist, or you want to get into production. Um, you have a lot of room to grow and maneuver there that simply was not present to the extent that it was when I graduated back in 2013. Um, and getting a strong portfolio is still extremely important. I would say that second to building connections, it is the most important thing. So following what is the most popular engine, which I think right now, currently Unreal is probably one of the most talked about, is a good place to start. In regards to um, how to jump from, say, indie to AA to AAA, that's actually a bit more fluid than it would seem. It's not like there's this hierarchy or this like linear ladder. It really is something that you can just shift from one job to another, especially given the fact that layoffs are so common and restructuring is still an ongoing process. Being prepared to shift between employers or shift between contracts, which is what I did for the latter half of my work in the industry, is pretty standard. Chrissy, you want to take it?
Sure. Um, when we're talking about part-time work, are we specifically referencing like freelancing, saying?
Oh yes, freelancing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so oftentimes employers will, and I hear about this a lot in the games industry. They'll hire you on as a contractor. Um, or a freelancer, when in reality you are under the law a W-2 employee. I believe several studios have gotten in trouble over this over the past several years. The biggest one that comes to mind is Riot. Um, and now that they got in trouble, they'll put you on a an 18-month contract and then let you go for 2 or 3 months and then bring you back. And this is all in a way to skirt paying you for the benefits packages that they offer. So they kind of like two-tier their employees. They give their full-timers these awesome benefits packages, and then they hire a bunch of people on contracts. But I've also heard about workers working through like a contracting agency, and therefore their employer is like technically not the game company, it's the contracting agency. Again, these are ways that, especially in like the AAA space or like with larger game studios, ways that the company gets around the law because they owe you sick pay and they owe you a health insurance plan and they owe you possibly some retirement benefits and other things that you should have. Um, but they skirt that they foist that responsibility onto the individual to figure out as opposed to like making them a full-time employee. All that is to say, if you're working somewhere and you're being treated like a full-time employee, you can go on the Department of Labor website for your state and find out exactly what the criteria is for being a full-time employee as opposed to a contractor. Um, Generally speaking, it's like you make your own hours. You don't have to report to any meetings. You don't have to go into an office. Like you're working fully remotely on your own time, and are just like given tasks to do. That's really what a freelancer is. If they're making you go in, if they're making you go to meetings, if they're dictating the hours that you work, those are surefire signs that you are not a freelancer. Um, but in those instances, you can report it to the Department of Labor and get your employer in trouble, which is not always what individual employees feel is the best course of action because they'd much rather keep their job um, than possibly lose it. But again, if you're working at a big studio and you know folks that are all in the same situation as you, talking to them, seeing what they think, and finding out whether or not they'd be in favor of forming a union so that y'all can get the full-time status you deserve and therefore all the benefits that you deserve, um, that's a huge first step. And when we're talking about money too, right? Like when we're talking about the difference between AAA and indie, SAG-AFTRA is a really good example of how they have negotiated with big companies as well as small companies to still make sure that their workers are covered, make sure that their workers are getting the pay and benefits they deserve. They've basically done what's considered a low budget agreement, meaning the budget for your game is of X amount, and therefore you need my talent for Y amount. Um, but again, like it still makes sure that those workers are protected on the job and that they get what they're contractually obligated to receive. They've also written language around AI, and especially for voice actors, I feel like that's a huge issue. Um, but again, there's many ways that we can resolve this. And, I think if you ever are interested in looking into the Animation Guild as an idea of what it could be like for game workers, like they work with studios like Disney, WB, studios that also invest in games. And they also work with indie developers like the new Has Been Hotel series that's on Amazon, like that started on YouTube. And that's now a newly organized unit under the Animation Guild. Um, that was a really long-winded answer, so I'll turn it back over to y'all.
Just to finish piggybacking on that, just to give a real world example of what some of Chrissy is talking about. When I started working at Bethesda Softworks, I started off as a contractor. I was not directly employed by Bethesda Softworks. I did that for about 9 months, and then I was offered a full-time position, at which point I did change employers. And there was that experience was me effectively competing with all the contractors that were in my pod. And some contractors who lost out came back in the next wave of contractors in the following pod to compete for full-time roles again. And to talk about contracting language and just like how insidious sometimes this language can be. After I was a full-time employee years later, we were comparing our contracts depending on when we signed on, and we noticed that for some of the employees that signed on later, there was language in their contract that gave Bethesda Softworks ownership of the uh, photos that they submitted when to become employees so that their faces could be used for artwork later on. So, for example, some of the default faces that are used in character generation may have actually been sourced from faces of actual employees who effectively signed away the rights to their likeness in their contracts.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. So if you, Alejandro, if you can address that, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, let me see if I can just go through these one at a time. So my full process, I'll try to just like share like a truncated version of that story. After I graduated in 2013, I did not secure a game industry role until about 2017. It wasn't for lack of trying. Like I spent a lot of time applying. I did work on my own, tried to research what roles were available. I was based in the DMV area, so initially I was looking at EA Mythic, but then of course they closed down. So I was then focusing on Firaxis and Bethesda Softworks, and I eventually landed that role at Bethesda. Um, Internships were kind of hard to find for me, especially remote roles. Mentorships, it's hard to give uh, like a concrete response to mentorships because they can look very different. Without an official contract associated with it, it's hard for me to qualify something as a mentorship, even if you're working with someone on a small project or providing some consulting or participating in game jams. Like, I think that there's a lot of like elements of those relationships that are very analogous to each other. Um, as far as where I got the most of my experience, I would like to think that all of the experience that I got was pretty valuable for a variety of reasons. I would say that my experiences, especially when I was a contractor, were among the most negative because I was very low on the ladder. I was constantly competing with my fellow contractors. Again, I had normalized clocking in 8 hours and working 10, working on my own time, and I've had some like health complications as a result. But when I did secure a full-time role, there was definitely a big shift in the energy that I felt from my fellow coworkers. And there were more opportunities to like have real conversations with full-timers that were both within the department that I worked in, as well as in adjacent departments. There were more opportunities to network. Like I got to go to E3 for free, um, stuff like that. And it gave me a lot of insight into both what I realized I wanted to do and just like how the industry was portrayed versus like what the experience actually was. Like I definitely had like rose-tinted glasses going into it that were very quickly corrected after the first year or two. Um, Chrissy, feel free to jump in.
I mean, my industry is experiences in specifically 2D animation, so I don't know if that's particularly of interest here.
Fair enough. Uh, I will add that a lot of this stuff can be applied elsewhere. So if you are interested in art and you decide that you want to start working in games, but you're not able to find your role there, you can do something that is industry adjacent that still is valuable. And that is true for, 3D modeling, programming, production, and a lot of the experiences that you will get, especially if you're working with a corporation, um, will prepare you for some of the things to expect and can help you dodge some of the common pitfalls that entry-level employees tend to encounter because the burnout rate can be very high, especially if you are going into this without a lot of knowledge of what to expect. I hope that answered your question.
And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can leave your question on the chat.
Yeah, I have a question. Um, kind of what your opinion on like live service games because those type of games are linked to like, a good amount of layoffs and also require a lot of manpower to create those games also. And also they just require a lot of player engagement just to keep up and running too. I'd like to see, excuse me, I'd like to know your input on that and if we see more live service games like that because it kind of seems like being a little downturn on those types of experiences.
Yeah, I've actually done a fair amount of research on this, so I can definitely jump in here. There was a lot of investment towards live service, particularly in the early 2020s. There was, I think, Sony had like somewhere around 12 live service games that they were working on at the time that they then cut down to six within the next 2 years. And I think they've slashed that down to four as of now. Um, there also were a lot of live service games that released to really bad reception. For example, I worked on a Fallout 76 for 3 years, both leading up to and after its release. And you can find a lot of interesting coverage around that. I personally recommend the video by the Internet Historian on YouTube. Does a really great, thorough overview of both Fallout 76's reception on release to the way that the company handled all of the reactions to that. It is very much worth your time. And that being said, like Fallout 76 went from a really unstable, shall we say, release to over the next 3 years, it was able to drastically course correct and not only become profitable, but become increasingly popular, especially after the release of the very successful Amazon series in the Fallout universe. That's not a common story, especially for live service games that um, are that problematic on release. Like a much more common story are stories like High Guard, for example, or Concord. And there's also issues with the way that live services typically make money uh, are off microtransactions or off of access to player data. So in your TOS, your terms of service, when you are choosing to access a piece of software, almost always, if that software is free, you are giving permission for those companies to access your data. And that's not just your player data. It could be your storefront data, your player history data across other titles. It can be your uptime, how you play, which then goes into helping them decide how to further curate the player experience to increase engagement and to increase the amount of microtransactions that are done per purchases. Probably one of the most famous live service games out there is Fortnite, which has proven to be so successful that it is arguably single-handedly responsible for epic success within the game development space outside of the uh, engine development that they do. But even Fortnite has shown a tremendous drop off in terms of both the player base as well as the amount of money that it's making. And then you've got games like Arc Raiders, Helldivers 2 that have been able to be successful, but are not without their own controversy. In regards to how I predict that these games are going to operate going forward versus how many live service games are going to be created. Um, one of the big reasons why live service games are being pushed so hard has less to do with what developers want or what players want. It has a lot more to do with what shareholders want because just purely based on how live services work, there is a very high initial investment, a significant amount of initial labor hours that are committed, but the growth model, both for profit and for content distributed, is very high and grows, shows a investment to value relationship that is like very extreme. So FIFA Ultimate Team, for example, would be another like live service style game that is just extremely profitable after a certain point, and the amount of upkeep that is required is still so much less expensive than the actual profits that are gained. And this is in large part why investors are pushing these types of games so hard. And it's important to understand that I'm not just talking about AAA experiences or PC experiences. I'm talking about your mobile games. I'm talking about your Facebook games, anything that you can play for free that gives you an option to buy in-game currency or pay for battle passes. Like all of that is part of the live service playbook in terms of how that's designed. Um, that being said, uh, live services are there's only so much player hours that can be devoted to live services, and as a result of that, there's a very small pie that game industry companies are competing for because of the fact that these games are such time vampires. By comparison, single player experiences are still, in my opinion, not only profitable, but can be very successful and appealing to players because it is something that the player picks up. They play often in a short space of time, or like consistently, they go from beginning to end, and they don't have to worry about competing with other titles as much. The only real competition that goes surrounding one player experiences is when they release. So, for example, you will see companies time their releases for games to when games are typically purchased, such as like summer sales, winter sales, leading up to Black Friday, stuff like that. And companies will intentionally try to accelerate the releases of their games to get ahead of their competition, or will delay games like GTA 6, for example, in order to find the right timing for when they want to put their title out there. Hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
No problem.
Great, thank you. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. So feel free to ask any questions if you have one. Maybe I can ask you one more question.
Sure.
I want if you can, like, I want you to kind of share your perspective on the current trend in layoffs and hiring freeze. Do you think it will eventually get better soon? Like, if so, like how many years? Or because Yeah, even like this economy, like uncertainty with the Iran war and all these things, even like universities sometimes go through like same economic uncertainty. And so hopefully as an insider, I mean, if you have any insight, please share.
Yeah, sure. I'll answer this question, and I think I can also answer the next question that was just
Right,
posted
thank you.
within a short space of time. Sure, sir. Um, in regards to hiring freezes and how I predict hiring practices are going to go, part of the reason why there are hiring freezes is because companies are anticipating when they're going to lose funding. And they're also, some of these companies are trying to get bought so that they can be consolidated. And that is probably the biggest contributing factor. So, for example, the reason why Fallout 76 was made was because ZeniMax, the umbrella studio that owns Bethesda Game Studios and all those other ones underneath that umbrella that Microsoft acquired, was because they were trying to get purchased by Microsoft and they wanted to come across as valuable, which contributed to hiring on a bunch of staff to ensure that that project got out there. So a very common practice, especially with live service games, but also true with like the bigger single player experiences, is there will be a lot of hiring leading up to a certain stage in the development process, especially leading to like a post production or post beta. And then there will be a drop off after a game is released. So if you have already seen a game being teased, odds are pretty good that there is going to be a hiring wave um, tied to that release, and you can anticipate it to a degree. And that is true for both hiring on people who are administering like quality assurance testing, for example, which is what I have a lot of experience in, or stuff like back-end maintenance or production-related assistance. And in regards to the more global aspect, uh, the stuff that is going on within the federal government, the stuff that is going on globally within the economy is definitely affecting where investor money is being placed, as well as where player interest is being driven, particularly in the Asian Pacific market. Um, and like where the focus is being made, there is definitely an increasing push towards mobile development, which has only continued to grow since I graduated and is projected to continue to grow going forward. And in terms of hiring, there's a lot of outsourcing that is being done. Particularly, I've seen a lot of jobs being offered within the EU and the UK. So it's not just within the states where relocation is potentially an option, especially if you want to work remotely. If you haven't looked at Game Dev Map, I strongly encourage you to look at that because you can track where jobs are growing, where jobs are being offered currently, as well as you can look at, I think it's called Game Dev Layoffs, that tracks the number of layoffs that have occurred. You can sort of see patterns as to where layoffs are projected to take place. I hope that answered that question. It's hard for me to, with any sort of confidence, guess where investment is going to shift outside of predicting that I think that there is going to be a significant decrease in investment towards live service going forward. As for the next question, if I was to do it all again, what would I do differently, or what I wish I knew entering the industry? Uh, I wish I had known just how competitive it was going to be, especially entering in quality assurance. The competition can be really cutthroat. Like I have seen some really vicious behavior within the industry. Examples are people stealing each other's work, people taking credit for work that they weren't involved in, um, flagging issues that don't exist. Attempting to negotiate like sort of like cloak and dagger deals, like Game of Thrones level plotting. Like it really is a thing, especially at the AAA level. And I wish I had like been more like mentally prepared to weather that storm. I also wish that I had not put my mental and physical health in the position that I did doing certain types of work. It's important to understand that really no job is worth you sacrificing your peace or your physical health in order to set yourself aside from your competition. And it's important to understand that while you need your employers in order to generate an income, to be able to advance your career, your employers need you too, especially leading up to releases or for feature critical stuff. So navigating into roles where you are um, indispensable, like for example, I moved towards like a certification related work, um, can really help you not only hold on to your position, but also continue to build skills that are valuable. And there is sort of a threading the needle element to that, where you are trying to find the right target point that both builds the skills that you want to build as well as build skills that make you valuable. I hope that answered all your questions.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, as time's up, we're going to wrap up here. And I really appreciate Alejandro and Chrissy, your insight. And typically we have more students join, but this is a very last week of school. So this one is now being recorded, and then definitely you shared really great data along with the explanation of current trend. And I would strongly recommend like our students watch it and to understand how industry's current trend is, and also about the importance of union and other important points you made. I really appreciate, and thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me. And for anybody who's watching this as a recorded video, you can always reach out to me at rpg@iatse.net.
And likewise, I've included my Discord information as well as a link to the deck. I'm also on the alumni Discord group for the GNU Game Design program. If you want to look out for me there, I do post in there as well as including job postings.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.